With Donald Trump taking over as President of the United States next month, what could it mean for China's role in world affairs and its global leadership? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Just over a month from now, Donald Trump will be sworn in as President of the United States. So far, the billionaire businessman has proven to be unpredictable, and there are many questions about the type of policies he will implement once in office. Some areas like trade, climate change, and security issues may impact China. And if, as some analysts predict, Trump chooses to be more concerned about domestic U.S. issues, like the economy, what are the implications for China, its role in the world, and global leadership? We begin with this report from CCTV correspondent Tang Bo in Beijing.
In November, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump promised to withdraw the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Deal, or TPP, on its first day in office. He called the 12-country deal, which excluded China, a potential disaster. That is in line with two of his major presidential campaign slogans, Make America Great Again and then America First. With the U.S. likely looking to scale back, many are wondering if it's time for China to fill the void of global leadership.
I don't think a Trump presidency will bring chances for China to lead the world. First of all, Trump will strengthen the power of the U.S. military in Asia-Pacific, as he plans to build nearly 80 more warships for the region. Secondly, even though he promised to pull the U.S. out of the TPP, he said he would find better deals which bring jobs and industry back to the U.S., and China might be excluded again.
But having chances is one thing, whether China is capable of leading the world is another. Despite China's remarkable economic achievements, its gross domestic product per capita still lags far behind that of the U.S. and regional countries like Singapore, Japan, and South Korea. Moreover, China needs to carry out major systemic reforms in order to deal with many of the pressing challenges, such as pollution and education. But the second-largest economy has done much to inject vitality into a sluggish global economy. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, both of which aims to plan and finance infrastructure projects throughout Europe and Asia. This is on top of the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, which is regarded as rival to the TPP. However, Zuo Shiying says those do not guarantee China taking the lead in global governance.
China will continue to play a constructive role in global governance. Whether it will lead the world depends on its international responsibilities, which are determined by global conditions.
China and the U.S. face big challenges, but there are also opportunities for cooperation in areas like the DPRK nuclear issue, cybersecurity, and anti-terrorism. So experts say what will be left for China on the world stage depends on how many strategic chances China can make for itself. Tang Bo, CCTV, Beijing.
And to discuss all of this, joining me now from Beijing is He Wenping. She is a professor and director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. With me here in the studio is P.J. Crowley. He is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. Also with me here in the studio is Saurabh Gupta. He is a resident senior fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. Welcome to all of you to the studio. Wenping, let me start with you and look at China's role in international trade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was something that was pushed by the United States, appears to be all but dead right now. There is no longer much support for it here. And last month at the APEC meeting in Peru, President Xi Jinping of China made the case for globalization and trade. So how important is Chinese leadership in international trade?
Well, China has benefited quite a lot from this global trade expansion. With China's entry into the WTO, China also adopted this opening up and reform. So we are in part of this global trade. So that's why we would like to push for this trade expansion and also free trade and also the regional trade cooperation. So that's why we are against those protectionism and also also those isolationism. So we want to like push more for the trade globalization. So that's why in the APEC meeting in Peru, President Xi Jinping called for this free trade and also called for the regional free trade cooperation. So you know, we all know the TPP. That's the thing pushed forward by the U.S. and also by Japan. But China was not part of that. We haven't been invited to join. So even though the TPP now seems not in a very encouraging trend, but China, we called for to have another, like this is called FTAAP, that is the free trade area for Asia Pacific region. So this is more inclusive, and China is part of that. And more country, comparing with those like 12 countries in the TPP, but this one will include more. I think it's 16, including even Latin American country and the Asian Pacific country. So that's more inclusive.
Right, and that one includes China as well. PJ, what are your expectations? It seems, as we've just been hearing, that China and the United States are pushing in different directions. China wants more free trade. President-elect Donald Trump here is talking about protectionist measures.
Well, I don't know that is necessarily the divide. I think U.S. policy for the last several decades has been to increase the level of trade and include China within the international trading and economic system. I was part of the Clinton administration when we helped to lead the way for China's entry into the WTO. I don't see the TPP as necessarily a vehicle to exclude China from the trading system. I think it was now an attempt to raise the standard of trade with the anticipation that China would raise its game and be able to qualify for TPP over time. But I think what Donald Trump represents is this challenge that while there is a globalized open trading system, something that the United States has advocated since the end of World War II, you have to do a better job in terms of how you manage the ripple effects of the trading system. And many people have blamed trade for the loss of jobs and that have occurred in various pockets of the United States, when in fact it's a combination of things. Some impacts of the likes of a NAFTA, for example, in this hemisphere, but also just the impact of automation that has transformed the global system. So I would expect that Donald Trump will evolve in this space. Trade is one of the major fundamental elements of foreign policy today, but it just shows you how the intersection of international affairs and domestic politics becomes more complicated here in the United States and in other countries around the world, including China.
Saurabh, as Wenping mentioned, there is another trade group which is being formed in the Asia-Pacific region. That's the Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, or FTAP, as it's sometimes called. If the U.S. does become more protectionist under Trump, how important will China's role be in pushing trade and globalization in the Asia-Pacific region?
Oh, it will be very important for China to take the leadership role in this space if it is possible for China to do so. China has been the biggest beneficiary of global trade. And yes, the initial signs from Trump is that he has, if not a protectionist mindset, at least he's coming in with a more mercantilist mindset. The beauty of FTAP is that the United States is a participant within FTAP. So even if TPP, which I frankly feel is dead in this administration and even down the line, I just don't think it has life. The United States gets to sit at the table in the course of FTAP discussions, and of course the political space for passing a large trade agreement in the US Congress, I think, is absent at this point of time. But FTAP is not going to happen anytime soon. So if the Asians go ahead with RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, maybe it might stimulate the Trump team to take FTAP a little bit more seriously so that they can also have have a seat at the table and a foot in this game. And hopefully things will turn around after a couple of years, not immediately, and the US can be a full participant and beneficiary of that process.
Wenping, when we look at China's role internationally, it has led the way with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. It plays a big role in the BRICS group of countries, and of course it's got all these massive investments in the One Belt, One Road initiative. How important is Chinese leadership for developing countries, especially countries in places like Africa?
Well, China's role in helping other developing countries to develop together now, I think, is getting increasing important. As you can see now, after this BRICS Bank and also AIIB, and also another is called the Silk Fund. So all those financial institutions, their role of this establishment of those financial institutions is trying to raise the fund and then to offer those financial support for those big infrastructure projects building in those developing countries, not only in those countries around those Belt and Road countries, and also in Africa and even in Latin America. So I think China now, with those accumulated abundant developing experiences, and also with this comprehensive national power, financial power, and also this capacity and experiences. Now China is playing this leading role in terms of South-South cooperation, and also in terms of those like emerging, we call it emerging development partner with those developing countries, many in African countries. So every time I visited the African continent, I will see more and the new Chinese projects are there. There's a railway and also port and hydropower, so all of that. So it really changed this landscape, in the African continent, to help them to develop. So this is the very obvious thing, and also a very powerful thing.
PJ, you said a moment ago that the Trump policy, economic and trade policy, will evolve after he comes to office. What should we read into the people who he's appointed already?
Well, I think he looks at foreign policy, in transactional, ways, and he looks at foreign policy as being a series of deals, and so there's nothing wrong with the rhetoric per se that says you want to get the best deal possible, for the United States. And the United States has always tried to aspire to deals that are quote-unquote win-win, and I think the United States needs to do a better job of dealing with the inequities that come out of these kind of arrangements. It's unclear that Trump is necessarily anti-trade per se. Obviously, his rhetoric tapped into a particular political thread within the American body politic. It would appear that he prefers bilateral treaty arrangements to multilateral treaty arrangements. Although, like I say, we'll see, how this evolves over time. Just to pick up on a moment ago, I was just in Morocco last week, and you can absolutely see the fruits of Chinese infrastructure investments, in that part of the world. I think the United States welcomes, China's role in terms of infrastructure development, in key places around the world. I think the United States would actually like to see a little bit more close coordination, so that if the United States has a development project in a particular place, and China does too, if you coordinate it, for example, I remember Secretary of State Hillary Clinton saying, in the Strategic and Economic Dialogue, if China's building a road and the United States is building a hospital, it'd be very nice if the hospital, sat on the road. So I think there's the opportunity for better coordination here. So I don't think that the United States and the Trump administration is necessarily anti-trade or anti-development, but I think they're reviewing the mechanics of how that works.
Okay, we're going to take a break right now. Much more on China's global leadership when we return. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. We're talking about expectations after Donald Trump takes office as President of the United States next year. What impact might that have on China's global leadership on areas from trade to climate change. Also joining us now from Shanghai is Victor Ai. He is an international commentator and former television host with CCTV's Spanish channel. Welcome to you, Victor. Let me start with you. Let's move on to another major international issue, and that is climate change. A news magazine here in the United States, Salon, recently ran a headline which said, China will soon trump America. The country is now the leader in climate change reform. I don't know whether that was meant as a pun there, but with Trump raising questions about his commitment to the Paris Accord on climate change, what will China's role be in implementing this accord, which was signed by nearly 200 countries?
Okay, Anand, thank you very much for having me. I think climate change is a huge topic, but also an essential topic for everyone. I don't care what Donald Trump, the new elected president of the United States, said, to the public or to the audience or to the media, if it is a hoax, something that the Chinese government made up, lots of years ago to cover the China's development, and others, it's probably a conspiracy. I think it is a reality that everyone should facing it right now. It is not just an agreement between the two governments, China and the United States government fighting against each other for a future development. It is something. Some people say it is a renaissance for all human beings, because all the governments have sat down for 40 years, negotiating, talking, fighting, disputing for this agreement. It's so-called the climate change or Paris Agreement. And now, as you have said, there are more than 200 countries have signed on this paper, which means it is an agreement for human beings.
Right, and Wenping, that was a point that was made by a Chinese newspaper, Global Times, which said that if Washington withdraws from the Paris climate deal, China will stick to its commitment, yet it won't be able to make up for the loss that's incurred by the US. So how difficult will it be for China to lead on climate change without the United States?
Yeah, if U.S. is out of this campaign, I think, of course, this is a big loss for United States as well, and a big damage for U.S. Global reputation. But of course, China will continue to make our promise to be made. And also, I think, of course, we start the partnership with the United States, and China's China's contribution to this global fight with climate change will be more difficult, that's for sure, because the U.S. is still the superpower in the world. It has the, the financial means and also the technical know-how. All of that are most advanced in our planet. So we start this partnership. China's this contribution, this fighting for the climate change will be difficult. But even though it is difficult, but China will not make a U-turn like U.S. has done, will do in the next administration. So I think partner with other countries, like those 200 countries has already made their assignment, and then partner with them, with European countries, even with African countries. I have to mention that even ever since the 2009, that FOCAC meeting, that is the Forum China-African Cooperation meeting, and China has already made a promise to help African countries to establish like as many as 100 those clean energy projects. So that's a big commitment for this climate change issue.
Okay. PJ, here we had the United States and China. They were front and center when this deal was being thrashed out in Paris. I think it's fair to say that when the legacy of the Obama administration is written, this will feature pretty high up. Yet now we have Trump who's threatening to unravel all of this. In fact, if you look at the transition team, there's 9 senior members who are climate change skeptics in that team.
Absolutely. Now we'll see what they actually do once they make the transition to being responsible as the president and his national security team. I don't think any decision that I think confronts Mr. Trump would have more devastating consequences to American leadership, than if it assertively tries to withdraw from the Paris Accord. I think it's more likely that they'll probably just slow the pace of initiative. They won't pull out, but they're not necessarily going to put a lot of oomph behind the climate accord. I mean, that said, on the one hand, the private sector is no longer debating this issue, and so even if the government remains ambivalent, there's going to be room for initiative at the state level, room for initiative in the private sector. So the United States could still well meet its obligations, but I certainly don't think that this is something that's going to be a key pillar of a Trump foreign policy. But just to reflect on my colleagues, I mean, this is for China there's been a remarkable leap, if you will, from the Chinese position at the Copenhagen conference that I attended in 2009, where China still had this question, we're a developing country and this is a developed world problem. And there you see that, just within a relatively short space of time, China has become a leader on climate. I think the Chinese leadership sees this as a question of critical political legitimacy in terms of its own relationship with its people. I also think that China rightfully sees that, this may be a good policy space and it's a good economic space. And so, China has taken off in terms of pursuing technology and believes that it can make money from this, and that's advantageous.
Right, enormous domestic significance for China, this deal. Saurabh, here we have a good example of global governance, the Paris Accord. How important is it for countries like China and the United States to cooperate in pushing a deal like this?
Oh, I think it's very important because, as all the panelists have talked, climate change is real and it is a serious threat to the planet. It is also an area where countries have been able to display their soft power and their global engagement, their role in global engagement by taking on important commitments. Just to move away for 1 second from US and China, for example, India, which has typically played hardball on a lot of fronts on multilateral negotiations. It has usually had a very harsh divide on North-South positions and has usually been very strong on South-South positions in multilateral venues, particularly in the area of international trade and international economics. The Modi government itself has taken some pretty strong steps in favor of being a good international citizen by taking on fairly onerous commitments as part of the Paris Agreement. And as you had mentioned, at Copenhagen, the Indians had been ambivalent at that point of time, and not as ambivalent as China perhaps at Copenhagen, but nevertheless, India has taken on pretty strong commitments. So this is an area to show to display soft power and to show your international engagement, and therefore, the presidential campaign out here, U.S. soft power has already taken a beating from the sordid nature and the tone of that campaign, and this would be a huge loss in that department, in the soft power department, if Trump were to remain the skeptic that he has shown to be. But I would also say he has at some point, he says a lot of things, but he's also he's attuned to reality, and I think he is not the person that he might necessarily have wanted to display that he is, and let's just have a little hope.
He met with Al Gore.
Exactly. Sure.
Victor, let's look at some other issues where there is a possibility of cooperation between China and the United States. Cybersecurity and fighting terrorism. How important is that moving forward?
Well, these are very hot topics and important topics between China and the U.S. Cyber internet, it's been a conflict, or in the media are talking about the conflicts between China and the U.S. We're fighting against each other. You have hackers, I have hackers, but it's a small picture. Let's see the bigger picture. Okay, we're fighting against the internet crimes, from both countries, because U.S. invented the internet and China is the biggest, user of internet, and we both put a lot of money and talent people into this industry, and we want this industry to be safe and secure and could be used for all the benefits of the whole world. That's why I think China and the U.S. are facing the same challenge. That's why we need to work together. In terms of the terrorism, I think that is not a question anyway, especially after the 2001's 9/11 accidents. The tourism has been a huge thing, not just for US, but also for China. And now you have seen a huge damage and a crisis that is happening in European countries. So China and the US must, and they have to cooperate with each other with exchanging information and cooperation in police and armed police, and in every level they need to talk.
Right. PJ, as we said in the introduction, you've been a senior diplomat of the State Department here in Washington. This week, we learned that Trump's pick for Secretary of State will be the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson. His choice for ambassador to China will be Terry Branstad. What do you make of those selections?
I think there's a logic behind both of them. Mr. Tillerson, for example, has a world perspective. If you're the CEO of a major multinational corporation like ExxonMobil, you have been a diplomat, you've done deals. And he obviously has a relationship with Vladimir Putin. Terry Branstad, as governor of Iowa, has known President Xi for a long time. They have a rapport. And he has a perspective in terms of the importance of Chinese investment, at the state and local level. I think they're both interesting choices. It's interesting that there's a different context here. That on the one hand, Mr. Trump has blasted China on trade issues through Twitter, and yet the area of always going to be points of friction between the United States and China, but the areas of mutual interest appear to be expanding. Mr. Trump has said favorable things about trying to reset relations yet again with Russia, and yet the areas of common interest between the United States and Russia appear to be narrowing. So it will be interesting to see if he actually has these, at least his rhetoric during the transition, somewhat backwards.
And Terry Branstad was called an old friend by China, which symbolically is quite an accolade from Beijing. Wenping, I've got a little time left, and if we look at a broad question here, if China is to adopt more of a leadership role in international affairs, will we see a change in style, perhaps more of an emphasis on diplomacy?
Actually, that's a trend. Now we see China is playing more and more important role in international stage, and also. But I think China is still in the process of learning, being a global power. So far, we are not at that point saying we can take the full responsibility being a global leader. I don't think so, because we're just beginning to learn this, how to assume those responsibility, global responsibility. But we are in that direction. You can see China now not only get involved in those development contribution for those global south, and also playing this role in like a peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping in those war-torn area. We are sending more and more peacekeepers in Africa. So we are also getting involved in those Middle East issue. So like bring Palestine and Israel leaders to China, trying to negotiate with the peace building. So we are learning. So this global responsibility is in the process of building, and even I think citizens, those education is still underway.
Okay, thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And we'd like to continue the conversation on social media. Give us your thoughts and comments on our Facebook page. That's at CCTV America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.